Most people think betrayal is loud. They think it sounds like screaming or shattering glass or a door slamming shut for the last time. But in my family, betrayal was always quiet. It was the soft rustle of expensive paper being slid across a marble table. It was 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Outside, the Chicago wind was howling off the lake, but inside my parents' North Shore mansion, the air was still and warm, smelling of pine needles and expensive perfume. I was standing in the foyer, my coat still on, when my mother Susan walked up to me. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask how my drive was. She just handed me a single sheet of heavy cream-colored cardstock. "We found something for you," she said. Her voice was light, casual, as if she were offering me a cookie. "Since you're still floating, the Vanderbilts are looking for a live-in nanny, full-time. We set up an interview for you tomorrow morning." I looked down at the paper. It was an itinerary. Job interview, nanny position. Requirements: basic childcare, light housekeeping, meal prep. "It matches your skill set," Susan added, smiling that tight, polite smile she used when she was being cruel. "And it comes with room and board, so you won't have to worry about rent." I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I stared at the paper, feeling the familiar coldness settle in my chest. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a servant. A problem to be solved. A drifting, aimless failure who was only qualified to wipe the noses of their wealthy neighbors' children. They thought I was destitute. They thought I was broken. What they didn't know was that, while they were arranging my life as a domestic servant, I was finalizing the acquisition of a company worth $4.8 billion. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My father Brian entered the foyer a moment later. He moved with the stiff, practiced posture of a man who had spent 40 years in boardrooms, convinced that gravity would obey him if he just frowned hard enough. He didn't look at the nanny itinerary in my hand. He looked at my boots, which were scuffed from the snow, and then at my coat, which was 3 seasons old. In his eyes, these weren't choices. They were evidence of my insolvency. He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a red envelope. He didn't hand it to me. He extended it, waiting for me to reach out and take it, a subtle power dynamic he had perfected when I was 6. "Your mother is worried," he said, his voice low as if discussing a terminal illness. "She thinks you're not eating enough. And with the holidays, well, we can't have you looking desperate. It reflects poorly on the family." I took the envelope. It had weight. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside, but I did anyway. I slid a thumb under the flap and peered in. It was cash. Crisp, fresh $100 bills. A quick mental estimate put it at around $8,500. "Consider it a bridge loan," Brian said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Just until you land that position with the Vanderbilts. Clean yourself up. Buy some decent clothes. And for God's sake, don't mention this to Zachary. He thinks we're too soft on you as it is." I looked at the money. Then I looked at the marble floors beneath my feet. I looked at the crystal chandelier above us, dusting light across the high ceilings. My father thought this was charity. He thought he was the benevolent patriarch tossing a lifeline to his drowning daughter. He had no idea that he was actually standing in my house. 5 years ago, Brian's sure-thing investments had evaporated overnight. He was weeks away from foreclosure. He was terrified of the public shame of the country club gossip. He never told me, of course. He only told his lawyer. But I knew. I had already built the foundational algorithms for Neuron-like by then. I had liquidity. I didn't write him a check. I knew his ego would never survive being rescued by his drifting daughter, so I bought the debt. I set up a shell company, North Shore Holdings, and purchased the mortgage from the bank. For 60 months, I had been the silent hand keeping the lights on. Every month, a wire transfer moved from my primary account to the shell company, paying the principal, the interest, and the property taxes. He wasn't the owner of this estate. He was a tenant, and I was the landlord who had never collected a single dime of rent. I looked back at the $8,500 in my hand. The irony was so sharp it almost tasted like copper. He wasn't giving me a gift. He was unknowingly issuing a partial refund on the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had quietly poured into this house to keep his reputation intact. I didn't cry. I didn't feel gratitude. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a balanced ledger. "Thank you," I said, my voice flat. I slid the envelope into my coat pocket. "I'll make sure this goes exactly where it belongs." He nodded, satisfied that the transaction was complete, that his dominance was reasserted. "Good. Dinner is in 10 minutes. Try not to say anything embarrassing." He turned and walked toward the dining room, his footsteps echoing on the floors I paid for under the roof I owned, secure in a reality that was entirely false. I watched him go. I touched the envelope in my pocket. It wasn't charity, it was a dividend. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a cavernous space dominated by a long mahogany table that could seat 20 but was currently occupied by only 5. My Aunt Patricia had joined us, smelling of gin and expensive hairspray. She sat next to Susan, the two of them flanking Brian like gargoyles guarding a gate. I was seated at the far end opposite my brother Zachary. Zachary was 32, a corporate lawyer at one of the city's most prestigious firms, and he wore his success like a suit of armor. He checked his Rolex, a Submariner flashy and new, before picking up his fork. So he said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "I heard about the nanny gig. Good for you, Anna. Honest work. Builds character." "It's a great opportunity," Susan chimed in, passing the potatoes. "The Vanderbilts are wonderful people." I cut my steak. "I'm not taking the job." The clatter of silverware stopped. Zachary laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Of course not. Why work when you can just float right? Must be nice. Meanwhile, some of us are actually grinding." He leaned back, swirling his wine. "Speaking of grinding, you guys won't believe what landed on my desk today. My firm is this close to securing the whale of the century." "Oh," Brian asked, his interest piqued. "Do tell." "Neuralink AI," Zachary said, savoring the syllables. "The tech unicorn. Valuation just hit $4.8 billion. They're looking for new legal representation for their IPO. And guess who's leading the pitch?" He pointed a thumb at his chest. "If I land this, I make partner. Guaranteed. We're talking millions in retainers alone." I chewed slowly. Neuralink AI. My company, the company I had built from a basement server farm into the global leader in brain-computer interfaces. The company Zachary was currently bragging about charming. "The founder is a ghost," Zachary continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "Nobody knows who it is. Some reclusive genius type. Probably some socially awkward guy living in a bunker. But I'll crack him. I always do." I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the desperate need for validation in his eyes, the fragile ego that required my failure to sustain itself. It suddenly made sense. It wasn't just that they thought I was a failure. They needed me to be a failure. If I was the nanny, then Zachary was the titan. My lack of ambition proved his drive. My poverty proved his wealth. I was the control group in their experiment of success. Without me at the bottom, they had no one to look down on. I wasn't just a disappointment, I was a utility, a structural necessity for their self-esteem. "What makes you think you can land them?" I asked quietly. Zachary smirked. "Because I know how these tech guys think. They want confidence. They want power. They want someone who can walk into a room and own it. Something you wouldn't understand, Anna. No offense." "None taken," I said. "It's a different world," Brian added, nodding sagely. "High stakes, big money. Not for the faint of heart. Zachary is built for it. Which you'll need with the Vanderbilt kids." Patricia tittered. "Maybe Zachary can hire you once he makes partner. Do they need someone to water the plants at the firm?" The table laughed. It was a comfortable, familiar sound to them, the sound of the hierarchy being reinforced. I looked down at my plate. I thought about the email currently sitting in my inbox, the one from Zachary's managing partner begging for a meeting with Neuralink's leadership team. I thought about the rejection letter I had already drafted in my head. I took a sip of water. "I wouldn't bank on it, Zachary. Rumor has it the founder is particular." "Please," Zachary scoffed. "Everyone has a price. Everyone wants to be in the room with the winner, and right now I'm the winner." He raised his glass, to Neuralink, and to finally getting Anna off the payroll. They clinked glasses. The crystal rang out a clear, pure note of celebration. I didn't raise my glass. I just watched them, realizing with cold clarity that they weren't dining with a failure. They were dining with the executioner, and the meal was almost over. Dessert was a lemon tart, tart and acidic, much like the conversation. Susan was leaning across the table, her face pinched with anxiety. "You really need to confirm the interview time, Anna," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Mrs. Vanderbilt is expecting you at 8, sharp. Don't be late. First impressions are everything." "I'm not going," I said again, my patience thinning. "Of course you are," Brian boomed. "Don't be stubborn, it's a foot in the door." Just then, the 85-inch television mounted above the fireplace flickered. The muted football game was interrupted by a red breaking news banner. The volume wasn't on, but the headline was impossible to miss. Bloomberg technology mystery solved. Zachary, who had been checking his phone under the table, glanced up. Brian grabbed the remote and unmuted the TV. The sound of a Bloomberg anchor filled the room, urgent and crisp. Ending months of speculation in Silicon Valley. The founder of Neuralink AI, the secretive tech unicorn that just secured a $4.8 billion valuation, has finally been identified. The company, which made headlines last week for successfully restoring mobility in over 50,000 paralyzed patients, has been led by a single reclusive CEO since its inception. The room went quiet. Zachary leaned forward, his eyes glued to the screen. "Here it comes," he whispered. The ghost. Sources have confirmed that the founder is 29-year-old Anna Vance. The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Then the photo appeared on the screen. It wasn't a grainy paparazzi shot. It was my official press photo taken 3 weeks ago for the Time Person of the Year shortlist. In the photo, I was wearing a tailored black suit standing on the stage of the Global Tech Summit, looking directly into the camera with a gaze that could cut glass. The valuation flashed below my face, NET worth $3.2 billion. The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the space. Brian dropped his fork. It hit the china plate with a loud clink that sounded like a bell tolling. Susan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Aunt Patricia stopped mid-chew. But it was Zachary's reaction that was the most satisfying. His face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. His jaw went slack. He looked from the TV to me, then back to the TV, his brain struggling to reconcile the two realities. The nanny sitting across from him and the titan on the screen. Vance, a prodigy in neural engineering, built the company's core architecture herself, the reporter continued. She has retained a controlling interest, making her one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in history. Industry insiders describe her as brilliant, ruthless, and entirely focused on the mission. I didn't look at the TV. I looked at them. I watched the realization hit them like a physical wave. The nanny itinerary on the table suddenly looked like a joke. The $8,500 in my pocket felt like an insult to a god. "Anna," Susan whispered, her voice trembling. Is that you?" I picked up my water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. "The Vanderbilts can find another nanny," I said calmly. "I'm busy running a multi-billion-dollar company." The false reality they had constructed, the one where I was the failure and they were the saviors, shattered into a million pieces. And I sat in the center of the wreckage, untouched. Chaos erupted. It wasn't the loud, chaotic panic of a fire drill. It was the frantic, desperate scrambling of rats on a sinking ship. Zachary's phone buzzed. Once, twice. Then it exploded into a relentless vibration against the mahogany table. He glanced down. The color, which had already left his face, seemed to drain even further. It's the managing partner," he stammered, his voice thin. My phone buzzed at the exact same moment. I didn't need to look to know who it was. It was my chief of staff confirming that the press embargo had lifted. But I picked it up anyway, unlocking the screen with a calm swipe. "You should probably answer that, Zachary," I said. "He sounds urgent." Zachary stared at his phone like it was a live grenade. He didn't answer. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and terrified. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw panic of a man realizing his entire career was built on a lie that had just been exposed. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew the firm was pitching Neuralink." "I knew," I confirmed. "I also know that you told your partners you had an in with the founder. You told them you were working a connection. Is that right?" He flinched. "You assumed I was a nobody," I cut in. "You assumed I was so desperate for validation that I'd be your stepping stone. You sold me as your asset without ever asking me. You lied to your partners, Zachary. You defrauded your own firm." Brian finally found his voice. "Now hold on, Anna. Let's not use words like fraud. Zachary was just showing initiative. He's ambitious. Surely you can understand that." "Initiative," I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "He bet his career on a sister he despises. He mocked me to my face while unknowingly begging for my business behind my back." I looked directly at Zachary. "Do you want to know why your firm hasn't received a response to your pitch?" He nodded mutely. "Because I flagged it," I said. I saw your name on the lead counsel list. I personally marked it, do not engage. I told my legal team that your firm lacks the integrity required for a partnership with Neuralink. Zachary looked like he might vomit. Anna, please. You can't do that. I'm up for partner. If I lose this. You already lost it, I said. You lost it the moment you decided I was beneath you. You lost it every time you interrupted me at dinner. You lost it when you called me a failure 10 minutes ago. I leaned forward. You don't represent me, Zachary. You don't represent my company. And after tonight, you never will. I'm blacklisting your firm from any future contracts, not just with Neuralink but with every subsidiary and partner in my network. Anna, Susan shrieked. He's your brother, you're ruining his life. I'm not ruining anything, I said calmly. I'm just correcting the market. He sold a product he didn't own me, and now the bill is due. Zachary's phone stopped buzzing. A voicemail notification popped up. He stared at it knowing exactly what it contained. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. The hierarchy had collapsed. The nanny was the client. The titan was the beggar. And I was the only one breathing easy. Brian wasn't used to losing. He was a man who had built his entire identity on being the provider, the patriarch, the one who held the purse strings. Watching his son crumble had shaken him, but now his survival instinct kicked in. He tried to rewrite history in real time. Well, he said, forcing a jovial tone that sounded brittle. This is certainly unexpected. But it's marvelous, isn't it? A billionaire in the family. I always knew you had it in you, Anna. I always said you were special. You said I was spinning my wheels, I reminded him. You said I was nowhere. Tough love, he exclaimed, spreading his hands. We were pushing you, motivating you. And look, it worked. I taught you everything you know about business. The discipline, the focus, that came from me. He looked around the table, gathering support. We should be celebrating my daughter, the Titan. This house. This lifestyle. I built this foundation so you could soar. I stared at him. The audacity was almost impressive. He was trying to claim credit for a success he had actively mocked. He was trying to frame his cruelty as strategy. You built this foundation, I asked softly. Of course, Brian said, puffing out his chest. I've provided everything for this family. This roof over your head, that's my sweat and blood. Is it? I pulled out my phone. I didn't need to shout. The silence in the room was so profound that a whisper would have sounded like a scream. I opened my banking app, navigated to the North Shore Holdings sub-account, and hit the AirPlay button. The Bloomberg news feed on the 85-inch TV vanished. In its place appeared a spreadsheet. North Shore Holdings, LLC, monthly, outgoing wires, mortgage principal and interest beneficiary, Chicago Trust, mortgage servicer, reference, 1420. Lake Shore, Drive Brian and Susan Vance. The rows went down the screen, 60 of them. 5 years of payments, every month $12,450. The room froze. It was the kind of silence you hear in a courtroom right after a guilty verdict. What is this? Susan whispered, squinting at the screen. This, I said, pointing to the TV, is the ledger for the shell company that owns your mortgage. Brian turned purple. That's private financial information. Turn that off. You said you built this foundation, I continued, my voice steady. But the truth is, 5 years ago you were insolvent. You were weeks away from losing this house. The bank was going to foreclose. You didn't tell me, but I knew. I looked at him. I bought the debt, Dad. I set up North Shore Holdings to acquire your mortgage so you wouldn't have to face the humiliation of bankruptcy. For 5 years I have paid every single dime. The property taxes, the insurance, all of it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope with the $8,500. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a soft thud next to the untouched lemon tart. You tried to give me charity with money I gave you, I said. You acted like the big man, the provider handing scraps to his failure of a daughter. But you weren't the provider. You were the dependent. For 5 years I have been keeping a roof over your head. Brian slumped in his chair. He looked small, deflated. The illusion of his authority, the myth that he was the king of his castle, had evaporated. He wasn't a king. He was a tenant living on his daughter's grace. I didn't want to embarrass you, I said. I wanted you to have your dignity. But you used that dignity to belittle me. I didn't know, Brian stammered. You didn't want to know, I corrected. It was easier to believe I was nothing than to admit you needed me. Susan was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. Zachary was staring at the table, unable to look at anyone. The shame was absolute. It was a physical weight in the room, heavy and suffocating. You owe me $680,000, I said casually, but don't worry, I'm not asking for it back. Consider it the cost of my freedom. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, the only sound in the dead silence. The ledger on the screen glowed, a digital monument to their hypocrisy. The execution was complete. I walked to the foyer, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble, a sound of finality. The family remained frozen in the dining room, trapped in the amber of their own humiliation, but before I reached the heavy oak door, I heard the scrape of a chair. Anna, wait. It was Susan. She stumbled into the hallway, her face ravaged by tears, her hands trembling as she reached out but stopped short of touching me. Please, she choked out. We didn't mean to hurt you. We wanted you to be safe. We were scared for you. Can't you see that? We're so proud of you now. We can be a real family. We can start over. Brian appeared behind her, looking aged and broken. Your mother is right, he said, his voice devoid of its usual bluster. We're proud. $4 billion. Anna, you've won. You've proven us wrong. Let us celebrate you. I turned to face them one last time. I looked at the tears, the pleading eyes, the sudden desperation to claim me. And I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The need for vengeance was gone. In its place was a vast, quiet clarity. That's the problem, I said softly. You're proud of the billions. You're proud of the valuation. You're proud of the having. Of course, Brian insisted. It's success, it's security. No, I corrected. It's status. And that's all you've ever cared about. You see the money and you think I've won. But you don't see me. I took a step closer, my voice steady and low. I didn't build Neuralink to get rich. I built it because I wanted to solve a problem that mattered. I wanted to help people walk again. I wanted to change the world, not just my net worth. That's the difference between us. You measure life by what you have. I measure it by who I am. We can learn, Susan pleaded. Teach us. I can't, I said. Because you only started listening when you saw the price tag. Your respect has a mission fee, and I'm not willing to pay it anymore. I looked over my father's shoulder at Zachary, who was lurking in the doorway, a ghost of his former arrogance. Your table is too small for me, I said. Your mansion is too small. Your definition of success is too small. I haven't just out-earned you. I've outgrown you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $8,500. I placed the stack of bills on the hallway table right next to the crystal vase. Keep the money, I said. You're going to need it for the movers. I opened the front door. The cold Chicago air hit my face, sharp and cleansing. A black SUV was waiting at the curb engine, idling my security detail ready to take me to the private airfield. I stepped out into the night without looking back. As the car pulled away, I picked up my tablet. There was a notification pending approval, a $10 million grant to a pediatric spinal research center in Boston. I tapped approve. The silence in the car was profound. It wasn't the silence of being ignored or overlooked. It was the silence of deep space, vast and limitless. I wasn't the daughter who needed fixing. I wasn't the sister who needed a job. I was Anna Vance, and for the first time in my life, the quiet wasn't a cage. It was a kingdom. Have you ever had to outgrow the people who raised you? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe in building in silence, hit that follow button.